Okay,
Hello,
we're recording.
good morning. Today our guest is Professor Jack Goldstone. Jack Goldstone is known for his writings on the Great Divergence, but today we're going to be talking about population growth. Jack, some years ago you published a piece for the Hoover Institution titled Africa 2050 Demographic Truth and Consequences. Why should we care about population growth in Africa?
Well, for the simple reason that Africa is going to give us pretty much all of the net growth in the global labor force in the next 30 or 40 years. I don't think people appreciate this. Right now, whether you look at Europe, North America, or China, the working age population is starting to decline. And in places like China, it's declining pretty fast. It looks like China's labor force will be down by 40% in the next 40 years. Now, the next 10 years, maybe not quite that fast, but after 2035, China's low fertility means that the working age population is just going to plummet. And there's nothing they can do about this because those kids have already been born. Everybody who is going to join the labor force 25 years from now is already here, and there are very few of them. So if the world wants to keep its economy humming, China's economy is going to shrink. India will just be stable, Southeast Asia stable. There's only one place in the world that is having substantial growth in the number of potential young workers. That's Africa. That's why we need to care about it. It's our future.
I agree. Africa is also a diverse continent, and the greater the diversity, the greater the opportunities for innovation. So there are extremities in diversity in Africa, so that's also a plus for Africa. But diversity again also has its downsides. But today the conversation is about population growth. In your article, you said that even when economies grow in Africa, the population will also grow. Why is that different in Africa?
Well, Africa is the only place in the world where families still want to have a lot of children. And by a lot, I mean 4 children or even more. As you said, there's a lot of diversity in Africa. Southern Africa, families are smaller, usually around 2 to 3 children. But in West Africa, they're often 6 to 7 children. So there's a lot of diversity. But as you say, that's a good thing because Africa has enormous potential for internal trade. That is, different regions of Africa specialize in different products, different skills. Right now, most African countries are kind of set up to ship raw materials abroad. So most of the rail lines and highways run from the interior to the coast, and they mostly connect mineral fields. We don't really yet have the infrastructure to connect the major cities of Africa to each other. But if that happens, I think there'll be an explosion of internal trade and manufacturing. And it'll be fueled just like China from 1980 to 2000. The population growth fueled economic growth. And Africa has the potential to repeat in some ways what China did.
Again, I am agreeing. Because of the degree of diversity in Africa, there is wider scope for more specialization, as you said earlier. And that's why it's so important for America to finalize its policy in Africa. Will America remain the superpower or will America retreat? Because if America decides to retreat, it must cede sovereignty to the Chinese, and the Chinese are in Africa doing real business. So I'm from Jamaica, and the Chinese in Jamaica, they build infrastructure, they build institutions. The U.S. officials, however, they provide countries like Jamaica with humanitarian aid or they invest in gender and social programs. But the Chinese have real cash. They're not wasting time on social programs. So America has to make up her mind. Is she going to retreat or is she going to remain the leader of the free world?
Well, I'm in no position to speak for America. I'm an academic observer, and right now there's quite a argument in American government over whether America should be engaged in Africa or just turn away. I think Africa is too important for America to turn away, but the people that are running the American government now have a very negative view of
Yeah,
Africa for the
exactly.
most part, right?
Exactly. Donald
And
Trump referred to Lesotho as some country in Africa. Exactly.
yeah, so they don't understand either the potential or the problems in Africa. They tend to see it as a country that has raw materials, a lot of conflict, um, and they don't think it's anything that the United States should get involved in, that it's fine for American companies to pull raw materials out, but the American government, as you know, cut back all of its foreign development aid and assistance. I think that's bad, but not terrible, because a lot of the foreign assistance programs, as you say, were not working very effectively. But the US has also reduced its anti-corruption enforcement. And I think that's not a good thing. Let's step back a bit and look at what went wrong in Africa for the last 30 years. So Africa was a continent. Africa is a continent that's rich in natural resources. And we had a commodity boom during China's great period of growth. And so a lot of African countries focused on improving their commodity exports. And a lot of that revenue went either to the government or to individuals who were able to get control of the major resources. And that led a lot of individual Africans to become extraordinarily rich. So the leaders of Angola, for example, other countries indulged in personal enrichment rather than building up their countries. And because the money was flowing into the government, that was like a honeypot that attracted people to fight over it. So you had different factions in the elite fighting over control of the government, and you had ordinary people protesting and fighting because they were being left out. So Africa had a period of commodity export growth, but the benefits didn't go to the country as a whole, it went to the leaders. So that's created a very unbalanced situation. Can it be fixed? I think it can, but it would take a kind of conscious partnership between China, African leaders, America, African leaders, Europe and Japan, to say, we're going to invest in Africa if you give us an investment climate that will be productive. And there are a lot of younger African leaders who understand this, that they're not looking for handouts, they're not looking for a donation of aid, they're not looking for social programs. They want business investment, and they want educational investment to prepare the workers for those jobs. And so if we start seeing Africa in terms of human resources, not just natural resources, but Africa's got the greatest volume of human resources in the world. They need to be invested in, developed. If we do that, we, meaning the richer countries of the world, everybody will benefit.
I am writing a book on Africa, and in that book, I mentioned the resource curse and how countries can use fiscal rules to manage the sovereign wealth fund properly. So in Angola, that's a brilliant example because Angola built a sovereign wealth fund and it was not one of the more effective ones, in contrast to sovereign wealth funds elsewhere. So Botswana has the right governance model, Angola does not.
Botswana's done very well by having a government that remained accountable to the population. Botswana has the advantage of having had a mineral resource, the diamond trade, and managing it sensibly. That is, the government looked at it as a long-term resource, and instead of trying to just sell as much as they could fast to get rich, they said, we're going to manage this for the longer term and try and invest our money in education and infrastructure. And so Botswana has lowered its fertility rate. Families are relatively small there for Africa, which means younger people get more investment per person. They get better educated. And so Botswana is kind of a good story. Now, Botswana is running into trouble because their natural diamonds are being less desirable now with the growth of synthetic diamonds. So Botswana is looking at changing its deal with the De Beers diamond monopoly. They're looking at alternative sources of income. But they have the most essential thing, I think, which is a stable and well-managed government. A lot of other African countries suffer either from instability or from governments that are not reliable in enforcement of contracts and law. Angola is a country, as you said, they had a national welfare fund that was deeply enriched, but a lot of the money was kind of siphoned off for the pet projects of Angola's ruling family. So I say I'm writing a book about the world called 10 Billion. And I say that Africa there has three obstacles to growth: corruption, conflict, and credit. Corruption takes resources that should be usefully invested and squanders them. Conflict costs lives and wastes capital. And credit, if it's wasted, simply puts countries deeper in debt and leaves them without the resources to move forward. But all of these problems can be solved and have been solved by some African countries. Botswana is a good example. Mauritius is even better. So African countries that want to attract investment and market products both to Africa and Asia and the world can do so. They just have to, the United States and China have to say, well, we're not going to deal with deeply corrupt countries. We want to make sure that the money we invest is well spent. And we're going to try and help African countries broker their conflicts. President Trump, fortunately, just helped broker a peace between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So we can use diplomacy. We can use debt relief and more effective credit. And again, African leaders, I think, are starting to recognize that enriching themselves in the short run is not popular with their people and is not effective in a competitive world. So African leaders who really want to embrace the idea of invest for the future, strengthen their people, promote their own human capital, are going to be great partners. We just have to kind of change our view that Africa's, mired in conflict and corruption. It has been in the past, but if it can achieve a better future, the growth potential will lift the whole world, kind of the way that China's growth lifted much of the world for the previous 40 years.
I agree. Let me tell you why I am agreeing, because I am not a contrarian. I think it's stupid to be contradictory for the sake of being contradictory. If you're right, you're right, and if you are wrong, you're wrong. And I am agree because I have read the literature. Secondly, I am a black person, and Africa is a black continent. And if Africa is indeed the poorest continent on the planet and slipping behind the West. If Africa continues on this path, people will continue to have a negative perception of blacks. So as a black person, I'm invested in Africa being rich.
Right, of course. Look, the thing is,
Africa, they will say, look, if Africa is so great, if Africans can build Africa, why are they going to UK? Why are they going to America? So when Africans build Africa, nobody will have these arguments anymore.
Well, people do not know, frankly, how many talented African professionals are working in Africa today. I think most people's view of Africa is very out of date. Even my daughter, I told her I was doing some work on Africa, and she started, where have you been in Africa, Daddy? Well, I went to, Addis Ababa, I've been to Morocco. And she started looking up cities in Africa. And she said, Dad, I was surprised when I look at the cities in Africa, they're full of modern skyscrapers. What happened? It's not such a backward place. No, it's not. Africa has centers for artificial intelligence research. It has centers for public health and disease management, staffed by terrific professionals. Kenya's energy grid is already...
I was just about to mention Kenya. Kenya is serious about R&D and building research institutes. Kenya.
Yeah, Kenya already has much of its energy provided by renewables because of progress in solar and geothermal energy. Africa is full of skilled and talented professionals. Now, if you say, well, why are they going to Europe and the United States? The answer is they can still make more money in a richer economy than they can at home. but they often will work for 10 or 20 years, accumulate capital, and then go back to Africa and invest there. Africa is starting to produce its own billionaires. It's
Yes.
building its own oil refineries. We're just kind of beginning to see a huge wave of industrial development in Africa to rival what's happened elsewhere. But people are just kind of stuck with this view of Africa as it was 30 years ago, and they don't see what it can be 30 years in the future.
Exactly. I'm realistic. I've read the data on human capital in Africa, and recently I interviewed Land Pritchett, and he was saying that developing countries are experiencing a human capital crisis, and he listed a particular country in Africa where elites in that country, elite students, they were performing at a lower level than the global average. And I'm saying, yes, that's problematic. But as you do know, economic growth is really driven by the smart fraction, the best and the brightest. And there are many brilliant people in Africa who are innovative and they're working. The issue is the legislative framework and the lack of formality. People don't understand how the lack of formality creates insecurity in Africa. And by the lack of formality, I'm referring to how African corporations are structured. Yes, African corporations are structured like a limited liability company, but they're managed like informal family businesses. So
Yeah.
somebody can walk into the office and say, "My uncle owns this company. I want 2 million."
Well,
Corporate
here's
governance, that's a big issue in Africa.
one big issue in Africa that I think will be something we have to think about is the strength of kinship relations.
Exactly.
Now, historically, Africans have not been able to rely on government. They haven't been able to rely on markets, whether it's for access to goods or insurance in case of disasters, or even for information to get a job or to find a spouse. They've had to rely on kinship networks. So there's a very strong sense of obligation to your family and extended family. And that still leads people to have larger families than they might have otherwise, and leads to, as you say, the kind of relationships where you get a job through your uncle knowing someone and informality persists. Now, that happened everywhere in the world. China had lots
Yes.
of that too before it
Governance
became.
is a problem in Africa. So in Africa, people will say, okay, my uncle owns this company. I want $1 million. And they just peel for funds. So back to the point about kinship, there this economist, he has written widely on kinship networks in Africa as a deterrent to entrepreneurship. Because in Africa, people are embedded in kinship networks,
Yeah.
and sometimes members of the kin, they pilfer from entrepreneurs. So when entrepreneurs accumulate wealth, they don't work for the person. They expect the person to give them money.
Well, here's the thing. Kinship networks can be an obstacle if certain networks get control of resources and hoard them. But kinship networks can also be the basis for entrepreneurship if they're competing for market share and are driven to be competitive. So a lot depends on whether markets are working or whether markets are being kind of limited by government and corruption so that certain kinship networks manage to prevent others from competing with them. Now, I've known Lant Pritchett for, I guess, 20 years, and he's really a wonderfully insightful guy. And one of his major insights is that even though a lot of money has been spent on education in Africa, the quality of education has not been good. And I think African leaders themselves have not been sufficiently ambitious. If you look at how China, Singapore, Korea, Taiwan pulled themselves up from poverty, they invested a lot of money in improving the literacy and mathematical skills of their workers. They created workers who could be creative, effective in factories, kind of universal secondary education, widespread training, apprenticeships, factory training. Africa has had kind of a elite down education system where, as you say, small numbers of people got very good educations either overseas or in a few top institutions in Africa. But most African youth have not been able to get a good education, either not even a good primary education, and certainly about half of sub-Saharan Africans are not able to get a good secondary school education. And that's a big problem if you're going to have modern factories producing goods. So I think this is not a kinship issue, not a corruption issue, it's priorities. The Chinese have not invested very much in education. As you say, they build railways and roads and
In
bridges.
Jamaica, yes.
But what we do need a better support system for funding quality education in Africa, whether that comes from the United Nations, the World Bank, Europe, US. But certainly there's a lot that can be done. Even a lot of older retired education workers from Europe and America might find later in life new careers as educational advisors or administrators in Africa. I mean, when you look at the number of young people that are entering school age every year in Africa, there's enormous opportunity there to kind of be creative and experiment with different kinds of education, different kinds of schools. So I think educational innovators need to look at Africa as a place to get to work.
The flow of capital should move from rich countries to poor countries. People with human capital in developed countries have so much to offer in the developing world. So, for example, we're talking about education in Africa. There are countries like the US, UK, Singapore, South Korea. Many of these countries have international education expansion programs. If Africa really wants a foothold in the global economy, it should do what the East Asians did several years ago. They integrated the foreigners into their education system. So today, for example, South Korea has academic partners in America, several academic partners. I
Yes.
think that's a strategy.
What's really amazing is if you look at China 40 years ago, it was actually poorer than many African countries are today. In 1980, China had been torn up by the proletarian cultural revolution. China was rife with conflict, corruption, poverty, and yet it only took about 20 years of good management to put China on a completely different track. Within 20 years, China had built its factory work system and was manufacturing goods for the world. And another 10 or 20 years after that, China had built a university system that is now world class. Again, it's just kind of a matter of priorities. China decided that education was important and it didn't want to lag behind the world. So it sent students out to universities around the world. But when they came back, Chinese universities like Beijing and Tsinghua and Fudan, Zhejiang, the Chinese Institutes of Technology, they now rank in the top 100 universities in the world. They're turning out more papers and patents than most universities in Europe. So the potential is there. I think Africa could also have its own world-class university system within 20 or 30 years if it becomes a priority.
And in those countries, elites are recruited to become teachers. So Jamaica is having a crisis in education because many of the people who teach don't have human capital to transmit. In
Right.
Singapore, the people who teach are highly intelligent. If you want the best students, you need better teachers.
Yeah, a part of it is paying people reasonably well, but part of it is also kind of tapping into a national spirit. If you treat teaching as important and you treat teaching as a respected and prestigious field, you'll attract good people. And if teachers are deeply respected, they'll care about their craft. Unfortunately, in much of the world, teachers are seen kind of like janitors. They just kind of go in, manage a space, let the students come through, and then mark the students' work and push them on. The idea of teachers as people who are skilled human resource managers and developers of young minds, that's unfortunately not the widespread view. We tend to think that
Not
money
anymore.
managers, right?
Not anymore.
No, not anymore, right? We think of money managers as prestigious and powerful, and they get huge amounts of money. But people managers, you think people are so much less important. Eventually, that's going to hurt us because the future has to be based on capable people. So we do need to make the training of people, again, a powerful, prestigious field.
And we also need to make schools more serious. I think
Yeah.
that's an issue with education today. So maybe
Well,
back
I'll
in
push
your
back a
time.
little bit on that. I think schools can be fun. And I think it's important, especially for young boys, to have opportunities for recess and games and to blow off steam. And they should have opportunities to, develop clubs or play music, even video games, maybe after school as an opportunity. We now have professional video game leagues after all. So I think what's important to make schooling creative and fun and a decent balance between work and leisure. If students are kind of forced to stare into a book or look at a screen all day, their minds glaze over. So I think it's really important to kind of have pacing, a few hours of math, a few hours of reading, but also some time for recess and time for making music or art or other cultivate other parts of the mind.
No, when I said makes schools serious, I was deliberately talking about Marxism. Students don't need to know about obscure Brazilian Marxist professors. That has nothing to do with education. Education has become a bit too politicized. Like if I
And
have
that's
children,
certainly true.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like children who are 12 and 10, they don't need to know about Karl Marx or anything like that. Income inequality in America shouldn't be on the top of the agenda. So school, in a sense, has become a bit politicized, and politics created triviality in school.
Right. Well, here's what I'm going to push back again a little bit because I do teach Karl Marx along with Adam Smith,
But at
and
the university level,
yeah, at the elementary school level, people need to spend time reading. When I was in elementary school, I read science fiction, I read Greek and Norse mythology. I read things that I thought had great stories because at the elementary level, the goal is to teach people to enjoy reading. It doesn't matter that much what they're reading as long as they really enjoy it and spend hours building their vocabulary and building their reading skills. Same thing with math. It has to be something they enjoy and that's fun. Otherwise, they won't retain it. Now, once you get into high school, then I think people have to learn about their history. They have to learn science. They have to understand what are the key processes that make economies and energy systems work. They need to know about different cultures and different peoples. And then by the time they get to college, they need to be able to independently judge and criticize whatever work is in front of them. Doesn't matter whether it's left wing, right wing, old, progressive, written by white authors, black authors.
exactly.
I always remember a passage. The great black sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois in America. There's a passage in his book on black souls that's autobiographical, and he says, as a black student growing up in America, what made me really angry is people told me, you don't need to read Shakespeare, you don't need to read Aristotle, you don't need to read poetry of John Keats. He said, that's all my heritage too. I'm a human being. The fact that I'm a black person whose ancestors are from Africa doesn't mean that I shouldn't have access to the world's greatest literature. And I think that's true for all of our students. We need to give everybody, whether they're in China, in China, people know Russian literature, they know European literature. Americans are pretty insular.
They
We
are.
don't know, we don't know enough about the world. But I think the whole point of education, if it works, it expands your mind. It makes you aware of things that you wouldn't come across by yourself. And that forces you to learn to think about problems from different angles. Now, I think we'll get there. I mean, education has run into some problems because, like you say, it gets politicized. There are
Exactly.
fads, right? But at the end of the day, the demand from students is to have an education that will help them in life, that will help them manage their affairs, that will make them more attractive as people and employees. And so when students start demanding a better, more relevant education, I hope the schools will start to listen.
I agree. So for if I'm a student, I have no problem learning Marx, Hegel, medieval philosophy. All of these ideas can inform my perspective, and they're important even if I disagree with them. But I object to the politicization of academia. You can teach Marx without saying all capitalists are evil. That's what I'm against. Yes, yeah, it will
Well,
become
let's put it this
trivial.
way. Even Marx did not claim that capitalists are evil. He said capitalism is a system that forces people to do things that are exploitative. And I think you can start from there and question that and say, does capitalism force employers to exploit their workers? It's an excuse for workers. I'm sorry, it's an excuse for employers if you say that. I think the question you get from Marx is, how do you create an economy in which workers get a full share of what they produce, and at the same time also offers incentives for entrepreneurs to hire workers to create new products? And I think once you start questioning Marx, it's a good place to start because he raises these important questions about what's the relationship between capitalists and workers, and what's the share that workers gets, and what's the motivation for entrepreneurs and capitalists. How do they get sufficient profit to be motivated and yet not squeeze the workers? All these are important questions because
Marx
there's no doubt,
say
right?
that the bourgeois class created wealth. People often forget that Marxian quote. He did say that
That's
that
right.
capitalism made us really rich. So again, I agree with you. We can teach Marxism. We can encourage people to critique Marx and the critics of Marx without being silly.
Right. I mean, Marx was writing 170 years ago. So it's very clear he did not have all the answers.
Not at all.
Right. So, but the problem that you point to is a lot of professors teach ideology rather than ideas. They put labels on things. These people are evil. These people are oppressive. These people are unjustly treated and need to be treated differently. That's fine. That's social advocacy. You can do that in your own time. But in the classroom, you should not be teaching people ideology. You should be exposing them to different ideas and encouraging them to come to their own conclusions. That's certainly what happens in my classrooms, and I think most of the people you have on this show would
Yes,
say the same.
because I only interview smart people.
Nothing to do with smart. It has to do, I think, your perspective. There are a lot of very smart ideologues out there right now. I mean, there are a lot of smart people working in the Trump administration who are carrying out an ideology that is basically government is evil, and we have to shrink government and dismantle government and do away with government. That's an ideology, and I think it's leading to some very bad decisions overall, even for America's future. But smart people can also fall under the spell of a powerful ideology. It's I think the job of scholars to always remain resistant to ideology, to question simple conclusions, and to say, why do you think this ideology is leading to a better outcome? Will it really do so? Under what conditions? What about other ideologies? How do we find a balance between them? So I think it's not a question of how smart you are. I wouldn't even claim to that. It's a question of whether you're committed to getting away from ideology and, as I say, expanding your mind, bringing in as many different points of view as possible.
Yeah, so back to income inequality.
Yeah,
Inequality is a source of progress. If we were all equal, society would be mediocre. We can't
yeah,
all be equal. We can be equal under the law, but we cannot have equal talents. If we're all equal, there is no civilization. We're just
yeah,
mediocrities.
yeah. There was a Greek myth to illustrate this point. It talked about an evil person called Procrustes, who decided that it was unfair for anybody to be taller than he was. So he had a bed built in his house, and he invited people to come in for night and sleep in the bed. But when they complained it was too short, he would cut off their legs so that they would fit the bed. That's why we speak of a Procrustan bed as a awful confining situation that cripples you. So that myth has gone on for thousands of years. The idea that, oh yeah, everybody has to fit the same mold, fit the same bed. Nobody can be taller than anybody else. That's a nightmare, right? It's a frightening thing. So yes, we have to have inequality. At the same time, I say, we have inequality in height. People can be anywhere from, dwarfs and midgets at 3.5 feet to NBA basketball players at 7 feet. And everybody has a talent and everybody has an ability. And, we have movie stars who are talented speakers, who are dwarfs, who happen to be extraordinarily effective actors. We have tall people, some of whom can play basketball and some who just don't have the physical coordination to do so. But we live with this. It's a fact of human nature that we have inequality in height, in physical skills, in musical ability, in engineering ability. And the way humanity moves forward is to say, we'll try and help everyone make the best use of whatever gifts or talents or individual characteristics that they have. The problem sometimes that makes people angry about inequality, I said, if inequality of height was distributed like inequality of wealth, we would have a few people who are giants, 50, 60 feet tall, walking around, and the rest of us would be like ants, just a fraction of an inch tall, because the disparities in wealth are orders of magnitude greater than the differences in height, physical ability, and so on. And that does make people a bit distressed, that we can deal with the fact that some people are super skilled athletes, but the rest of us at least can still play sports. Some people are capable of incredible abstract mathematics. The rest of us, however, we can at least balance a checkbook. But when it comes to wealth, we do have a situation in which the wealth of those with hundreds of billions of dollars is kind of unimaginable to those of us who live on tens or 20,000 a year. And I think there we do get some problems of injustice. If you say, how much inequality do we need to motivate people to be productive managers, entrepreneurs, skilled athletes? Well, in the 1960s, America was growing 3-4% a year. The economy was strong, and top managers earned about 20 times as much as the average worker. Apparently, a 20-fold advantage in income was enough to motivate people. Today, however, it's an order of magnitude greater. It's the top managers, the chief executives of Fortune 500 companies, they make 200 to 300 times as much as the average worker. And they're not providing any faster economic growth rate. In fact, our economic growth rate now is lower than it was when the disparity between the CEO and worker was a tenth as large as it is today. And part of what happens is when the inequality is so great, then the people who are on the bottom, they get angry, they get discouraged, they vote for authoritarian leaders, they vote against markets, they do all kinds of things because they say, hey, there's so much inequality, there's no way I can catch up. There's no way my kids will get into a better school. There's no way I'll be able to save for the future because all of the money is going to the top 1%. So I'm sympathetic. I understand that when inequality becomes so extreme that people lose faith in the system and they lose their confidence and optimism, that's not good because free markets depend on optimism, confidence, and lots of people wanting to do their best. So I think even free markets benefit from inequality being kept within some kind of bounds that are a little more confined than we have today.
Some people would say CEO pay is linked to productivity. They would also argue that workers are paid based on their productivity, and we're not decoupling pay and productivity. These are strong empirical arguments, especially if you read people like Scott Winship.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to measure this, though. Here's the thing. If we look at average wages in America over the last 40 years, they have grown. So it's not true to say that wages have stagnated or gone down. But if you kind of disaggregate a bit and you say, well, the wages of women have gone up because women used to face really severe wage discrimination, they still face some, but much less. So the wages of women have gone up. The wages of Blacks and Hispanics have also gone up because discrimination has been reduced. So although the wages of women and minorities were lower than average 30, 40 years ago, they've caught up considerably. So that's been growth. And then the wage growth of the top 20, 30% of people with college education has gone up very highly. And the wages of knowledge workers, executives, financial workers have gone way up. So there's been a lot of wage growth in the economy. But if you look at the wages of non-college educated men, they've gone down. They're kind of an outlier in this system. And it's the non-college educated men that are falling into opioid abuse, depression, extremism, conspiracy theories. So you have to pay attention to where the wages are going. You can't just look at a national average and get a good picture. So pay and productivity, they do need to be linked, but the type of jobs available for non-college educated men have not been good jobs. They've not been high productivity jobs anymore, with manufacturing becoming more automated. And so, if you're a male in your 40s and you don't have a college education, it's hard to get a job that gives you self-esteem or the ability to support a family. And so you can say, oh, well, the market has linked pay and productivity. Yeah, that's efficient. But if it leaves, tens of millions of people in jobs that don't give them self-respect, then that really does damage both the politics and the economy. I don't think you can have a whole society flourish when some people are doing extremely well, but other people feel that they're being cheated or betrayed.
But are there lucrative opportunities for college for men who are not college educated? I think so. There's some time ago I was watching CNBC, and there was this young man. He graduated from high school, led a small business. I believe he was cutting the grass or something else. I don't remember, but it was a small business. He sounded really articulate and was planning to start a private equity company eventually. And in another component of the interview, there was an older lady who said they're high paying technical jobs. They don't require a college degree. They're really high paying jobs, and they provide people with the relevant skills. So, are there opportunities for men who are not college educated? I would say yes.
There are opportunities, but again, we have to kind of take things apart. So for young men who are not college educated, there are excellent opportunities to take advantage of technical training and skilled craft trades. There's a huge unmet demand now for skilled construction workers, people putting together everything from solar plants to oil fields, building electric power lines. If you like working outdoors, if you like working with your hands, if you just want to be busy from 9 to 5 and use your dexterity skills, and you're willing to do that and get trained for it, yeah, there's a shortage of skilled welders. There's a shortage of skilled fitters. We have a huge housing shortage. We need an awful lot of people to do skilled construction work to build the electrical system and plumbing systems for all the houses we need to build. People think of construction work, oh, you're just moving bricks, you're just sawing wood. No, construction work requires a lot of skilled workers as well. So there are opportunities, but those are better for young people who are in their 40s usually have a much harder time training for those kinds of jobs. It's also the case that a lot of those people in their 40s, they had a good job that they were committed to for 10 or 20 years, but then the factory closed down or they were replaced by robots and they were moved to a lower paid, less respected kind of job. And for them, it's really hard to figure out how to start over. Now, some people who have the imagination to be entrepreneurs can still thrive. If you have the patience and the ambition to start your own business, even if it's a landscaping business or a roofing business, you can hire younger workers to work for you. But that often requires some capital to get started. You may have had to learn entrepreneurial skills from a relative or a mentor who kind of showed you how to deal with banks to get a loan and how to manage employees. Not everybody can do that. Now, I saw an interesting study about men and women. As you know, in America, fertility, that is the number of children people are having, is quite low. Both right-wing and left-wing people are worried about this. The right wing says, go back to traditional families. The left wing says, we need to do something to help women. Whatever you do, the fact that by and large, families are not having even 2 children, but more like 1.5 on average, people say, well, that's going to be a problem for us because there aren't going to be enough workers to pay taxes for Social Security. There's not going to be enough workers to do the housing construction and man the factories that we're trying to bring back to America. So why is fertility so low? Well, part of it is because college now graduates more women than men, and college-educated women prefer to marry a college-educated man.
Yes.
But there's an excess of college-educated women. So who do those college-educated women marry? They marry.
They choose not to get married.
No, they actually don't. That was interesting. College-educated women get married at about the same rate that they did 30 years ago. About 75% by age 30 are married. But the college-educated women who don't marry a college-educated man, they marry the most successful of the non-college educated men. That is, people who started a business, people who are artists, designers, skilled craftsmen, people who have built a good career for themselves, even though they didn't go to college. But the non-college educated women who are looking at the rest of the marriage pool, they're looking at non-college educated men who have low-paid jobs or struggle to get full-time work, and those are the ones that are not getting married. The marriage rate for non-college educated women has fallen from about 75% to 50% because they don't find men who are non-college educated who can provide for them. In fact, a lot of the non-college educated men who are not in good jobs are bitter. They have self-confidence problems. When they get married, they get into fights and get divorced. So there's a very low rate of marriage now for non-college educated women who can't find a confident, happy, non-college educated man because the wages and employment for that group of the population, which is a very large group. I mean, 2/3 of the population still don't graduate from a 4-year college. The economy has basically been structured to give huge rewards to high skill, high educated, creative people. I mean, even if you can, put a basketball through the hoop, you can get $50 million a year now as a top athlete. When I was a kid rooting for Willie Mays, he was the highest paid baseball player when baseball was the top sport. And he was getting $100,000 a year. And we thought, wow, that's such a huge amount of money, right? $100,000 a year. Now they get $100,000 a game. So this reward system that we have has kind of sorted people out. Yes, it's rewarded creative, skilled people with very high incomes, but it really has been very hard on the people who used to do just fine in a factory job, in a retail job, who could, make enough money to be proud of themselves, support a family, feel good about themselves. And we've made it much harder for them. And I think that has really hurt our social fabric.
I was about to say that usually the highly intelligent and the rich don't have children, but that relationship is presently being overturned because I've seen studies both for Europe and in North America showing that highly educated people are having
Right.
children. And
Yeah.
in some parts of America, to be upper class is to have multiple children. So some upper class people in America are now having multiple children.
Right.
So you're indeed right about that. Working
Right. But
class people not having kids.
that's that's because we've made having children a luxury good. Having more children is like driving a luxury car or dressing in designer clothes. And in fact, the people who are having those children dress them in designer clothes, because they want to show that they have a family and that their kids are the best off, that they can do everything. Having children now is pretty expensive because not only is childcare very expensive, but it's a competition. You want your kids to play sports. You want your kids to travel. You want your kids to learn uh, who knows what, to horsemanship, tennis, uh, lacrosse. And so, wealthy families invest so much money in creating kind of miniature replicas of themselves that the opportunity for children of different economic groups to just play together is kind of fading away.
That is, you're so right. 50, 60 years ago, more poor people knew wealthy people and upper middle class people. Today, poor people really know other poor people. You're so right about that. Because the rich and the poor, they don't live in close proximity to each other anymore. The rich live in gated communities, and the rich, as you said, they're investing aggressively in various social protocols to give their children a leg up. As Richard
Yeah.
Reeves said, the upper middle class can calm down.
Well, yeah, and it's not just the rich. I mean, it's really, as you say, the upper middle class, kind of the
Yeah.
top 1/3 of the wealthiest families really separate themselves from the bottom 2/3. And that's not healthy. It's very hard to have a society where everybody feels like they're working together for common goals if that's missing.
When upper middle class people were living in a closer proximity to working class people would admire them and they would assimilate into upper middle class culture.
Yeah.
Today, the working class is literally working class. Culturally, they don't aspire to be like the bourgeois class anymore.
Yeah, and that
They,
varies
they attend a
also.
different church. Usually, working class people would attend the Methodist church or the Episcopalian church, and that would assimilate them into upper middle class culture. But today, poor people have different aspirations. They have created their own subculture that's quite different from the upper middle class culture.
Well, it used to be that, working class people had their own working class culture, but that validated people. They belonged to working class clubs and communities, and they were respected if they were a good father or a good husband, or if you just kept a job. I mean, for someone in working class culture, if you have a full-time job and you keep it and you do it well and you bring home enough money to put food on the table and to pay the rent, you were respected. And that was enough for families to thrive. I mean, they didn't think about, oh, well, we should have a new car every year or we need to take vacations in Europe. But now, TikTok has basically said to everybody, you need to have influence, you need to be seen by everybody. And it's created a culture of really kind of extreme competitiveness. And the fact that the upper class, you know,
But
rich
Jack,
people,
TikTok culture,
we're too separated now. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
it's okay. TikTok culture, Jack, is not upper class culture. So the people
Yeah,
on TikTok, they're pretending to be upper class, but TikTok culture is not upper class culture. It's really low class culture.
but it
So
feeds but
working
it
class
feeds
people,
aspirations.
exactly. But real upper class people are not like TikTok people, and
That's right.
that's a big problem I have with influencer culture. Many of the people who are influencers, they have no expertise really. So there are people who talk about finance who have never managed a successful business. They don't have a finance degree, but they talk about finance, and it's really odd. We
Right.
live we live in the age of lunatics. Some of the most influential podcasters are not intelligent. They have no academic qualifications. They are not interested in reading, but they have a mic. They have a microphone.
Yeah, we've switched entertainment for information. How do we change it back?
Exactly. Entertain. No, like I am 31, but I remember being 15 and 16. People who were on TV were intelligent. People who were on YouTube, the podcasters, some of them did not go to university, but they were intelligent. Today, any random idiot can go on YouTube and say Hitler was a good guy, and people take him seriously. Like millions of people take them seriously. And I'm baffled. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I have a simple proposal. I told you I'm writing a book about future population called 10 billion. It won't be out until next year, probably not until May or June of next year. But I have a simple proposal in that book, and that's that everything in social media and television and radio should be treated like the books in a bookstore. That is, there should be a fiction and a nonfiction section. And the nonfiction section, you'd have to be certified to present there. You'd have to have a degree or credential, and you'd have to be subject to criticism that if you put out information that other people identify as false, you would lose your nonfiction credential. But for fiction, you could say anything you like. You can say, Hitler was wonderful. He lifted Germany. He never killed anybody. Yeah, you can put that in the fiction section. But we have to draw a line and say not everything in fiction should be treated as true, right?
That's my point. Like Candace Owens, he should be in the fiction section. Because whether you want to believe it or not, these are powerful people. People take them seriously.
Well,
they get to go on the Piers Morgan show, and they're everywhere.
Yeah, and part of that again is we have a culture of celebrity and a culture of money. So if you have enough money and you have enough celebrity, you can say anything and people will think it's true.
Yes, they will literally think that it is true. So are you on Twitter?
Am I on Twitter?
Yes.
Not anymore. I'm on Blue Sky.
Okay, okay. Well, I am on Twitter. I was never a fan, but when I'm on Twitter, people pop up into my feed. These craziest people ever. They will go somewhere and say, "This is what they took from us." And a white man is kissing a white woman, and they say, "This is what the Jews took from us." The Jews took nothing from you.
Yeah, but these are damaging myths, and they're definitely dangerous. They get people killed.
They do, and people take them seriously. People really take them seriously. And I have another issue again. If you are credible people, don't show the fake news or the garbage of incredulous people. So if I am on Twitter and let's say Jack Goldstone shows a video of Candice Owens to point out that he's crazy, just don't do it. Just ignore. So like for me, no, seriously.
Okay.
If people mention Nick Fuentes, I mute them automatically. That's an automatic mute. If they mention Candice Owens, automatic mute. And I'm serious.
Yeah. Well, you know what those people are saying, and you know why they are saying it. Hopefully, I can say things that are a little unexpected and make people question, right? I have a very small audience on Blue Sky. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on TikTok. I'm old-fashioned. I kind of talk on podcasts. I write books. I write articles. And I think it's part of a great debate. We should think of ourselves as always being in discussion with other people and trying to make a good argument based on reality.
No, let me tell you what you should do if you want to be famous. If you want to be famous?
Not really, no.
I know you don't. Join Twitter, show a photo of a mansion and say, "This is what the Jews took from us."
Well,
turn into a celebrity.
It's always easy to blame someone else. It's much easier than blaming yourself or blaming a system that's more difficult to understand. When I talk about, the situation for non-college educated men in America, the same thing is true for a lot of even educated people in Africa or Asia. They'd like to come to the United States or Europe to work, and we put up obstacles and say, no, you can't come here. And then you can say, well, who is taking that from us? The white man's taking that from us. They're taking away our future. Well, you have to build your future yourself. I think that's the answer. Stop blaming people for taking things away, maybe things that you didn't have, and start thinking about what you can build. And actually, I see this, the young people in Africa who for many years used to shout and scream about imperialism and the West is their enemy and the West was taking things. Now they're starting to say, actually, look, China was in the same boat that we were in, and China got rich and powerful. So we in Africa need to figure out how we can do it too. We can become rich and powerful, and we should take responsibility and do it. And I see that in the younger generation of African scholars and business entrepreneurs, innovators. And that's, I think, is great. I think that's going to be the most important thing for our future.
Yeah, that before we wrap up, that's in my book. I have a section in my book where I talk about how Africans can become realistic and get more power and what they can learn from successful groups, like the Jews,
Great.
for example.
Well, I agree with that. I'm
Yes,
glad to
that's
say
I
I
have
agree
a
with you.
section like that in my book. How Africans can maximize on the power of the diaspora, because many people don't understand diaspora politics. So some people brag about the Jamaican diaspora, which I consider to be a weak group. If you are Jamaican abroad, how do you help Jamaica? You help Jamaica by training Jamaicans who migrate to America. So if Jamaican entrepreneurs migrate to America, you should create a book, how to do business in America, a guideline for Jamaican entrepreneurs. That's how you help Jamaica. It's good to be philanthropic. Nothing is wrong with that, but you really don't help Jamaica by just buying books for random students, or say you're going to give a computer to a random center. If you really want to help Jamaica, you should allow us to scale globally. I am not big on sentiment. So in Jamaica, we don't really understand diaspora politics. If you're a wealthy Jamaican abroad, use your money to lobby the US government to favor Jamaicans. That's how you help Jamaica.
Yeah.
That's diaspora politics. Like some people criticize APAC, but I think APAC is a good thing. If I were a rich Jamaican, I would have an organization like APAC. That's how you help your country. You don't help your country by being sentimental and saying, oh, we love Jamaicans and they're in Jamaica illegally and they're not going home. That's not how you help your country.
I agree. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I hope Jamaica moves. I had a very talented young Black woman student from Jamaica, and she got her degree working with me and then went back to Jamaica to work in economic development.
Oh, great. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
But
So, I think there's no place in the world that young people are not worth developing and exciting and inspiring, because young people are the ones who really can change things.
okay. All right. So, yes. Thanks for coming on.
That includes you too.
Yes. Yeah, I plan to change things too. Probably start a
Excellent.
think tank at some point. Okay.
Excellent. Anyway, so let me just say I'm excited that your show is about ideas, not
Yeah, I'm
ideology.
getting close now, so you can say this after.
I know, gotta close. But the future lies with young people in Africa.
All right. Thanks. Okay.